Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are decoding a seriously complex piece of Fichtean philosophy, but we're going to do it through the lens of a grim, dark fable. We're looking at the architecture of Wreckage and the Sovereign Void. This is a text that completely strips away everything we think we know about society, destiny, and honestly, ourselves. It's not just a dry philosophical text. It's got this highly theatrical, almost graphic novel-style edge to it that takes us on a deep descent into the human mind. It challenges us to take a really hard look at the structures we build just to feel safe. And it asks a terrifying question. What actually happens when a chaotic force decides to tear all of those structures down? To really understand this, we have to start by listening to the voice of our primary antagonist. Or, depending on how you look at it, maybe our brutal savior, the Crimson Jester. Listen to his visceral opening dialogue. He says, "Look at your piteous knight of reason, that deluded laborer polishing a wall of law that exists only in his fevered Apollonian dreams." Right out of the gate, the jester establishes our baseline human existence as completely stagnant and deeply, deeply deluded. He doesn't see us as heroes. He sees us as pitiable laborers who are endlessly trying to shine up laws and rules that literally do not exist in the grand, silent universe. Okay, let's dive into this. The jester looks at what we so fondly call our heroic journey, and he describes it as nothing more than a treadmill of blood. It's such a chilling phrase, isn't it? What he's getting at is that the paths we rigidly follow, chasing success, fulfilling societal duties, perfectly obeying the laws, they actually form a spiritual prison. We are exhausting ourselves on this treadmill, serving false destinies and external obligations. We act like dogs begging for a master who, in reality, never existed at all. We're bleeding for an absolute illusion. Which brings us to Act 1 of our Fichtean dialectic, the thesis, or the architecture of illusion. So, in Fichte's philosophy, the thesis is essentially our starting point, our unquestioned everyday reality. For humanity in this particular fable, that reality is the comforting illusion of objective law. It's the lie we tell ourselves that the universe has strict rules, that society's expectations genuinely matter, and that if we can just build a strong enough wall of logic and tradition, we'll be totally safe from the chaotic void. The text illustrates this illusion beautifully through the 4 parables of the corrupted Goldnar. The first is the parable of the gilded anchor. Here, the Goldnar clutches his heroic fame, like this heavy, solid gold anchor, entirely convinced that his legacy is going to keep him safe from the rising tide of the abyss. But it's a dire warning against chasing false fame. Because when the great star rises, its immense heat turns his precious gold into deadweight lead. The very legacy he thought would save him actually becomes the chain that drags him down into the depths. And when he cries out for a master to come save his legacy, he's answered only by purifying silence. Let's anchor ourselves in the terminology for a second. That literal gold dragging him down, that represents what the jester calls the spirit of gravity. This is the heavy, stagnant weight of slave morality. It's that immense pressure to conform, to obey, to just fulfill external obligations because someone told you to. It actively engineers that spiritual prison we were talking about. The Goldnara's anchor isn't keeping him steady. It's locking him onto that treadmill of blood, making sure he never achieves true individual freedom. Now, what's really interesting about this perspective is how the jester brutally mocks our attempts to hide from reality. He tells us, you wrap yourselves in an ivory mask of logic, a fragile shield against the staggering, emptied nothingness that is the only true architecture of the silent universe. This brilliantly highlights how our societal structures, our sciences, our moral codes, they're all merely a facade. They are just an ivory mask we put on because we are quite literally too terrified to look at the blank, empty void that actually makes up the universe. This facade gets exposed even further in the parable of the polished mirage. In this story, the Goldnar spends eons in a scorching desert, obsessively polishing a mirror he finds and calling its reflection the absolute truth. He takes these reflections and weaves a mask of sanity from them, desperately trying to shield himself from the staggering, empty nothingness of the wasteland. It's an incredible metaphor for how we construct our own societal structures. We polish up our highly subjective ideas until they look like an Apollonian illusion of objective truth, all while completely ignoring the vast, empty desert surrounding us. But illusions cannot last forever. And that forces us right into Act 2, the antithesis, the subterranean collision. In dialectics, the antithesis is the violent opposing force that clashes directly with the thesis. Here, the illusion of law and order is about to violently slam into the raw, chaotic reality of the universe. The mask is about to crack. And the mechanism for this clash is the Fichtean concept of the Anstoß.
Think of the Anstoß as a violent subterranean collision with reality. It is the primary catalyst perfectly designed to shatter human delusions. In our parable of the desert mirror, when the Anstoß happens, the mirror doesn't just crack a little bit. It instantly dissolves into chaotic sawdust. The Gildner's precious absolute truth simply vanishes, leaving him entirely maskless and staring directly into the terrifying nothing that was lurking right behind the facade the whole time.
And who exactly delivers this collision? The Crimson Jester. Look at this quote. "The jagged power of my laugh incinerates your dogmatic ideals and the stagnant weight of your slave morality." Notice that the jester doesn't fight with a sword. He fights with active laughter. This laughter serves as a metaphysical blade specifically engineered to shatter stagnant traditions. It's a completely active, destructive force that cuts right through the spirit of gravity, reducing our beautiful cages of tradition into absolute dust. When that illusion finally shatters, the individual is plunged directly into what the text calls the null space. The null space is the purifying abyss of the void. Think of it as the ultimate incinerator for dogmatic ideals. This is a highly necessary, utterly chaotic realm where the heavy chain of the anchor drags the corrupted spirit so it can undergo total psychological death. Because you cannot be reborn until the fragile ego, the one built on society's comfortable lies, is completely destroyed in this abyss. So the crucial point is what happens next. Stripped of the ivory mask and plunged deep into the null space, the individual has to face the maw of the absolute. This is that terrifying, heart-dropping realization that there is no savior coming for you. There is no master reaching down to pull you out of the abyss. The horrifying yet somehow liberating truth is that you are the void staring back at yourself. You are completely alone, and for the first time, you are completely responsible for your own existence. Let's move on and see how this builds into the final dialectical step. Act 3, the synthesis, the sovereign rebirth. Having survived this intense psychological death, the individual doesn't just vanish into nothing. They are reborn as a completely autonomous creator. We see this exact struggle play out in the parable of the sovereign ash. Initially, in a state of sheer madness, the gold nar tries to rebuild his comforting wall of law, using the literal ashes of his burnt idols. He still clings to the idea that structure is the only cure for a chaotic universe. He wants to define good as the safety of the wall, and evil as the fire that took it down. But the jester just walks right up to this newly built wall of ash and shatters it all over again with a single jagged laugh. He forces the golden to see that trying to rebuild the old laws is entirely pointless. What the jester is actually performing here is a philological transvaluation. This is the act of taking the ashes of those destroyed laws and turning them into the ultimate canvas for self-determined creation. The lesson here is incredibly profound. True mastery is not found in building protective walls to hide away from the void. True mastery is actively commanding the nothingness. It's taking the ashes of your old, destroyed beliefs and using them as the raw material to forge your very own sovereign meaning. This evolution is fully realized in the final story, the parable of the broken music. The goldenar sits alone in the void, just weeping because he can no longer hear the voices of the gods or the laws of the kingdom. He's totally lost. But then, he takes the rhythmic sounds of the world's collapse, the actual cracking of his own ivory mask, and he begins to play music. He takes the destruction and turns it into a life-affirming flame, finally realizing that he himself is now the autonomous lawgiver of the void. He has officially entered what the text calls the seventh solitude. This is a powerful state where the unburdened spirit finally and completely rejects the must of destiny. Instead, it fully embraces the play of the child. Sure, it is an agonizing solitude at first, but it evolves into this monstrous, beautiful synthesis of reason and chaos. It transforms pure victimhood into active, self-directed creation. You aren't following orders anymore. You are playing the game of the universe entirely by your own rules. Let's just quickly trace this exact psychological evolution. Step 1. You begin as a victim of nothingness, weeping and suffering psychological death as all your comfortable illusions are violently stripped away. Step 2. You enter the seventh solitude, enduring the brutal isolation of realizing no master is coming to save you. And finally, Step 3. You emerge as the sovereign architect. You harbor the Dionysian fire within your cracked vessel, actively shaping the void rather than cowering from it. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate contrast of this entire philosophy. On one side, you have the Goldnar's delusions, enslaved labor, slave morality, the myth of objective truth, and that fragile wall of law. On the flip side, we have the Crimson Jester's reality. Total individual sovereignty, the sovereign architect, active creation, and the joyful play of the child. It's the journey from being heavily anchored to a treadmill of blood to dancing freely in the ashes of the void. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought. What will remain when your ivory mask cracks? Because the Anstoche is coming. That subterranean collision with reality always comes, eventually. So, are you currently exhausting yourself on a treadmill of blood, endlessly polishing a wall of law that doesn't actually exist? Or are you ready to face the purifying silence, command the nothingness, and finally become the sovereign architect of your own existence? It's a terrifying thought, for sure, but ultimately it might just be the only path to true freedom. Thanks for learning with me today.